In the graffiti community, there's a topic that gets commonly brought up every so often, the topic of street art versus graffiti. Oftentimes when this happens, the two are pitted against one another. But what if I told you street art isn't a category of art in the way that you might think it is? You see, in the graffiti community, when people say the term street art, oftentimes what they mean is any art in the streets that isn't letters. This is normally what people mean when they're having casual conversations, and this works out just fine because everyone who's having the conversation can get an image in their head when you refer to street art in this way. It allows people to follow the conversation a little bit easier. However, when the conversations get a slight bit more technical, anything beyond just the surface level, it becomes clear that that definition no longer works. And the issue is simple. Graffiti defines a specific art form, as to where street art doesn't. After having a talk with Webster's Dictionary, we came to the conclusion that modern graffiti, tags, throwies, and pieces, aren't properly defined by the current definitions, as not all graffiti is illegal, on walls, or scratched into surfaces. For example, when you go ahead and do some graffiti in your book. You see, like many words out there, the term graffiti can mean different things based on the context of the conversation. And we agreed that modern graffiti is best defined as a letter-based art form, similar to typography, script, calligraphy, so on and so forth. Now let me be clear, that doesn't mean the other definitions of graffiti are wrong, but when we're talking about the context of graffiti as an art form, those definitions don't accurately describe what graffiti's become. So now when we look at street art, we quickly realize that the term doesn't describe what was painted. The term itself doesn't tell us the art, its fundamentals, or how it looks for that matter. We only know where it is. The issue here is technique, or how you go about your creative process and how you use the tools at your disposal, doesn't define an art form. So for all we know, it could be a cartoon character on a wall, or it could be a realistic portrait, it could be a landscape, it can just be something abstract. And as a result of this, the term street art is more similar to the term Renaissance, where these terms describe points in time, places, or general art movements. Just like street art, the term Renaissance doesn't really tell us what was painted. It doesn't describe or define the first or second pillars. We only know it was painted between the 15th and 16th century, or the 14th to 17th century. Now here's where things get a little bit confusing, because graffiti is also an art movement. So what's the difference between graffiti being an art movement and something like Renaissance or street art being an art movement? Over the whole lifespan of art in general, many art forms have come into existence and they begun as art movements. Art forms such as Cubism, Surrealism, Impressionism, graffiti, these are all forms of art, but they're also art movements. However, unlike Renaissance and street art, we can map out an actual fundamental set for each of those previously mentioned art forms. And that's the key difference right there. The fact that these specific art movements have a fundamental set associated with them that defines the actual form of art. And on top of that, and this is a really important point, is that we can actually map out how the elements of art function within the constraints of the art form specific fundamentals for each one of those art forms. And it's important that you're able to do both. It's important that the term describes not only a fundamental set, but also describes how the elements of art function within that fundamental set. And that's not possible to do with terms like street art and Renaissance. Where Renaissance, you can kind of get a vague idea as to how the elements of art might be performing and how they're utilized, but you're not really getting an idea of the art form specific fundamentals, and as a result you can't describe what was painted, as the term Renaissance is more so describing a period of time in which art was being created. And very similarly with street art, where with street art you can kind of get a general idea as to what the elements of art might be doing, but you still don't have a fundamental set to describe exactly what was painted. So now that we got that out of the way and cleared up, this puts us in an interesting position, because now we understand that street art is a more general art term, and that means that any graffiti in the streets technically falls under the umbrella category of street art. But not all street art is graffiti. So if graffiti out in the streets is technically street art, then why do graffiti artists and street artists alike make the distinction between the two with terms like street art versus graffiti? And the answer is simple. Because the term graffiti defines a specific set of fundamentals, letter structure, next space management, letter name weight, letter name positioning, and flow, the term graffiti becomes a little bit more descriptive. And as a result, when you're speaking casually between people, the term graffiti is able to be used in order to kind of put an image in people's heads. So you can kind of extract graffiti out of the umbrella of street art when having this conversation, and just have all of the other art forms that would fit under street art still contained within street art, making it easy to talk about the two. It also helps that graffiti largely takes place in the streets and is associated with that, as for the other art forms that fall under street art like cartoons, portraits, so on and so forth, they're not really associated with being in the streets as much as they are being just defined art forms. And that only makes the separation of graffiti from the rest of those things a lot easier to do. So that's pretty much the differences between street art and graffiti. Street art is a more general art movement, art category, and graffiti fits within that and describe something a little bit more specific. That's the basic breakdown behind this. Either way, they're both awesome, so let me know which one you enjoy doing in the comments down below. Now check it out, if you're learning graffiti and you're kind of struggling with the process, a little lost and confused, we just came out with the Ultimate Graffiti Guidebook. It's a comprehensive guide to graffiti, teaches you all graffiti's fundamentals, and I think it'll really help you out, especially if you're picking up graffiti. You can find a link to it in the description down below, and if you want to check out the best how to do graffiti playlist anywhere online, we got that right up here for you with more graffiti content right down here. But with that said, I've been John Grimm. Subscribe if you learned something. I'll catch you guys back here next week.